and the FinTech remains an emerging market that's expected to worth about $30 billion by the end of next year, 2022. And looking back to the emergence and growth of the Islamic finance industry, it is a phenomenon that has generated considerable interest in the financial world because it has the ability to offer products to the underbanked, unbanked, underserviced Muslim world and the West, and where significant segments of the institutional and retail markets are actively considering this alternative for their financing and investment needs. Now, Mr. Kateeb, will you give us more information about the Islamic finance and the FinTech ecosystem in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a little presentation I'd like to go through. Thank you very much. I would like first to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity here to talk. And it's going to be very challenging. I have about 10 to 15 minutes, and I need to actually talk about the fourth industrial revolution, about the FinTech, which is the financial part of the fourth industrial revolution, about the Islamic finance opportunity, and about the Islamic FinTech and where we are right now and what's the roadmap. All this in 10 minutes. So it's an amazing challenge, but we'll try to do it. The presentation, please.
Mr. Kateeb, you can see from these screens as well.
Are we there? Okay. So I enjoyed tremendously the presentation of Mr. Al-Muashir earlier in the first half, because he actually looked at so many dimensions of the change of what is happening in our society and in our industry. And I'm going to look at another dimension, which is basically the technology revolution that actually is driving so much change and the expectations and all that. So we've been living this revolution for around 10 to 15 years, but it was recognized, I think, in 2015 by the World Economic Forum as it is the revolution that is blurring the lines between the three spheres: the physical sphere that we live in, the digital sphere, and the biological sphere. In addition to that, one of the key drivers of these technologies are the big techs, and we have a quote here from the head of Google, who basically thinks that what is happening today with technologies such as AI is more profound than fire and electricity. I know for some people who are not in the technology, they may think it's really an exaggeration, but I believe if you look out into this revolution in all its dimensions, it is a profound. It only happened in our human history 4 times, and we are in the 4th time right now. If you look at if we zoom in to the financial industry, our part of this revolution is actually got ignited after the crisis, the financial crisis of 2008. And as a result of that, we saw a little bit of distrust to the financial system, and we saw a large number of fintechs or startups who actually tried to offer services just like what the bank is offering. And what they focused on is a disruption to the business model, the operational model, and the customer experience. Look at this at E&Y, looking just on the US, 16% of the people in the US in 2015 experienced a FinTech service, and by the 2019 it was 64%. It's really a tremendous growth. If we look at this revolution, we're going to look at when I'm talking about the FinTech revolution, we'll talk about the technology perspective, and we will talk about the customer perspective and the market perspective. But the technology perspective, it's basically the set of technologies A lot of people put them around 16 technologies that actually disrupted our world. And I can put them in 3 categories. Some of the technologies, as what they did, is disintermediate the middleman. So all of a sudden you can actually be in touch with a vendor in the US and purchase your products and do your services. Of course, the technologies such cloud mobility allow you to do that. And then greater automation. Everybody's talking about digital transformation. Everybody's talking about, I think I have not talked to a single bank that's not their top priority and number one initiative is around digital transformation. So there are a lot of technologies involved, like artificial intelligence, big data, analytics, etc. And then we have great decentralization. And the great decentralization, it's basically, of course, blockchain is dominant there in addition to the cloud and the cybersecurity, the importance of cybersecurity. I put on my slide on the bottom right, blockchain challenges, because I don't want you to think that those technologies do not really come with a set of challenges. And blockchain is being overhyped in some areas without looking correctly at the use cases of the blockchain. So you still have a problem with the scalability of the technology, the privacy, and other challenges that the bank or the financial institution has to consider. If we look at the industry perspective, I'm sure I'm not going to go through those, but you've seen all these initiatives in our financial industry, from the payments, the crowdfunding, etc. And from the customer perspective, it become more customer-centric and focusing on the customer behavior. It's actually, if you look at technologies like artificial intelligence and pattern recognition, and more than ever, financial institutions, actually all companies are doing that, but because we're talking about the financial sector, financial institutions are studying the behavior of the customer. And the segmentation has dropped from being male, female, older than 40 years, younger than 25, to actually what we call the segment of one. I want to understand this customer, his behavior or her behavior, and what kind of purchasing behavior they have, what kind of lifestyle they live, and I want to actually offer them a service that is focused on that specific customer. In addition, of course, we have the millennial generation driving this revolution because of the tech-savvy nature of this population. The FinTech main characteristic, again, Mr. Al-Maashir, when he talked about the 6 Ds in his slides, some of these, 3 of them are actually on my slide. When you talk about the characteristics of what makes FinTech special, the first one is that they use data very, very strategically. Financial industry had data for a long time, but they really never used the data effectively to understand the customer and position the products to the customer correctly. The FinTech came and used AI and used other technologies to understand the customer. In addition, of course, to the 3Ds, you are dematerializing all the physical world around us into digital. You are demonetizing and moving to digital, like cryptocurrency, and etc. And the democratization of services and allowing everybody to access these services. All this is focused on the empowerment of the individual. Based on that, a new ecosystem worldwide is being created, and this ecosystem starts in the country. You have an ecosystem in the country, you have an ecosystem in the region, and you have ecosystem in the world. And the ability to connect all these pieces are possible with technologies such as open banking and digital banking. We had in this revolution new players, amazing. Everybody's so interested in the financial services because of the opportunity. So we, in addition to the startups of FinTech, InsurTech, and RegTech, we saw the telecommunication players coming in, the retailers, the social media, the insurance companies, etc. They're all coming in trying to actually offer these kind of services. So when we talk about the Islamic finance, what is the opportunity and how is, from the FinTech and the FinTech perspective, what can they do to the Islamic finance industry? We have a population of about 1.95 billion Muslims around the world. Most of them live in the OIC countries, and that's about 25% of the world population of 7.8 billion people. The average age, which is amazing, is actually 24 years old. If you look at, this is, by the way, is growing faster than any other religion in the world. If you look at by 2030, and I think this is a conservative number, they're expecting it to be around 25.4%. If we look at from the financial inclusion perspective, we have also an amazing story, an amazing opportunity here. We have over 1.8 billion unbanked customers. We have 50% of the unbanked customers in the world with a 25% population. So that's definitely, there's a huge gap in the social, in the banking inclusion or the financial inclusion. We also have an amazing, when you look at the what we call MSMEs, the micro and the small and medium, we have over we have about 200 million businesses that are actually unbanked, and most of them are in our region. The pie and the opportunity is tremendous, and I believe in the Islamic finance, we need the FinTechs to actually capitalize on that. If you look at the Islamic finance today, we have about 2.2 trillion in the banking sector. We have about 1.7 billion in the Islamic, 2.2 trillion is the total Islamic finance. 1.7 trillion is actually in the banking sector. 500 billion is in the sukuk. 900 in the Islamic funds, and 250 billion are in the takaful. If you look at, of course, this is within 3 years, you expect to reach about $3.5 trillion. The account ownership, which goes back to the financial inclusion, in the OIC stood at 42% of the eligible people who can actually have accounts, where in the modern world, you were talking about 92% actually have banking accounts. Of course, inside the OIC, there is a lot of differences between countries like Egypt with a high population. They're only standing at 23%, while in UAE, you're looking at 88%, which is much closer to the Western world's numbers. In addition, having account openings, a lot of, it's much higher, about 5% higher in the OIC countries, even versus Muslims in other countries. They say they are not banking because of religious reasons. And the final point is there is around $3 trillion of funds that the countries, the Muslim countries own. Only 650 billion of that to 700 is actually sitting in Islamic finance. So why do the Muslims do not actually, 50% of them don't have bank accounts? These are the 5 or 6 reasons, but basically you live in rural areas, you're poor, you're too far from a bank, you don't have the documentation, etc., and that's why you're not. And if you look at every single one of them, there can actually be addressed by technology and by FinTech. So Islamic FinTech come into a very important opportunity to solve very important problem. And when you're talking about the SDGs and you talk about the social finance, definitely Islamic FinTechs have a very key role to play in that area. Key areas of opportunities, just for sake of time, I'm gonna go faster in this. But they will give us the ability to reach more people and to have more impact, and we can address the financial inclusion that we have been talking about, and support the SDG global goals. The current state of Islamic fintechs, we have around 100 Islamic fintechs around the world. It's interesting that Indonesia, which is really, when you look at the Islamic finance numbers, they have only 4 to 5% penetration in Islamic finance in Indonesia. They actually have one of the highest number of fintechs in the country, standing at 31%. That shows you that the dynamics of the fintechs are completely different than the financial institutions. Other countries that have a lot of fintechs are actually US, UAE, and the UK and Malaysia. Where are these fintechs are playing today in the Islamic finance? We have a lot of fintechs playing in the funding. I listed some of the fintechs that actually address each area, but we have them in the funding. We have them in the trade finance. Trade finance, I'm pleased to say that we actually, one of the key players with our fintech, we created a fintech called iFin, Trice, that allow to do international trade finance using the blockchain technology, and it democratized the whole trade finance process. We're also created a fintech, we're a partner in creating a fintech called iFin in the financing area, where we're connecting the retailers with the banks, so you can actually, as a consumer, walk into any retailer and you can finance based on Islamic product, you can finance any of your purchases. We launched this fintech in Oman, and we are moving through the GCC and very soon in Turkey, actually. And there are a lot of fintechs in the capital markets. Out of the 100, here's a few examples. We have fintechs in the Islamic finance, in the wealth management, and takaful. When we say we as an industry, we only, Path Solutions only has the two fintechs that I talked about. So my final slide is about the roadmap and the key stakeholders and what everybody has to do to actually empower this ecosystem to play the role that it should play in the coming years. The most important, of course, the stakeholders of the ecosystem is all the government, the private sector, the investors, the VCs, the academia, and etc. But I believe that the key role here is, because we have been a heavily regulated countries for so long, I think the government has to play a key role in ensuring that this ecosystem realize its full potential. So the government needs to optimize the regulatory framework. They need to introduce policies that foster competitiveness and innovations. If you look at like open banking, when we talk about open banking and we talk about digital banking, all these around, for example, in the EU, they got the PSD2. In UK, they have the open banking initiatives. It is in our region or in the OIC, we have some countries who actually already introduced open banking, but it needs to be introduced in all the countries. We need to promote a healthy ecosystem and creative and innovative economy in the country to allow us to do that. Finally, which is most important for the government, they have to balance the customer protection versus the fintech growth, which is very important area, and it's actually one of the most difficult problems worldwide. When we look at the financial institutions, we are a conservative industry. We have been a conservative industry for a very long time. The ability to play in this with the startups in this new world is very difficult. And you have to recreate the culture internally and externally. And you have to establish a lot of partnerships internally and externally to the financial institution to actually be able to contribute into this industry. And finally, you saw how much of the funds in the Islamic countries is going into the countries, very small portion. I believe the fintech should take a very important focus for the investors to invest in this FinTech ecosystem. With that, as I told you, I have a very limited time. I hope that I gave you a good picture of what's happening in the Islamic finance and the Islamic FinTech. Thank you very much.